I'm going to talk very briefly about the Marvin Sapp situation. And I'm going to be honest, as a person who was born and raised in the church, have evangelists in my family right now. It started raining really hard. That's why I'm like, what? What is that? Hopefully it doesn't pick up on the microphone. So anyway, born and raised in the church. I'm going to tell you the honest truth. Grew up on Christian music, gospel music, love it to this day. I never got into his music. I know he's known for Never Would Have Made It. By the way, look at my shirt. I know it's backwards. I saw this when I was in Tennessee last year and I had to have it, you know. So anyway, I got this from yahooentertainment.com. Not going to read the whole thing. Marvin Sapp has responded to the controversial viral clip where he commanded the ushers of his church to close the doors until $40,000 was donated by the congregation. In a lengthy Facebook post, Sapp explained why he instructed the doors to be shut, the biblical intent behind the specific ask, and shared that he also paid it forward with more than the 100 he requested of ministry leaders. Recently, a clip has gone viral of me challenging 2,000 individuals, virtually and in person, to plant a seed of $20 during an international gathering held at a convention center, with over 4,000 people in attendance that evening, plus virtual viewers, wrote the 58-year-old. In that same moment, I also challenged leadership to lead by example by sowing $100 that evening. I personally gave much more, and I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, as a person who, like I said, grew up in the church, I'm going to keep this specific to the tithing situation. And I pay my tithes. I've been paying tithes for decades. And I'm thinking what's happening a lot with today's world. You have some people who might be going to church who are not used to, you know, how maybe the black church works, or tithing, things like that. I'm not changing up just a little bit. I used to listen to Michael Baisden, and I've mentioned him before. And he used to me, he had a serious issue with Christians. And he would always talk about pimps in the pulpit. Sorry, I'm not looking at the camera. And he used to have an issue with what he would call pimps in the pulpit. And I remember being offended by that because, at that time, I was going to churches that I felt were of sound doctrine. They weren't in it for the money or being, what you would call a pimp in the pulpit. Jamal Bryant is another one that I would consider a pimp in a pulpit based on some of his sermons that I have heard. He's more of a social activist who's a great orator, who learned how to bilk money out of people. Just my personal opinion. And God forgive me if I'm wrong, but it's my opinion. Marvin Sapp, on the other hand, I don't know enough about his preaching to give that opinion, which is why I want to keep this to what he did. And he has since offered an apology. So I'm going to read a few scriptures. I got this from King James Bible Online. Again, I have been paying my own tithes for decades, and it's never hurt me. As a Christian, I am obligated to pay my tithes. This does not apply to people who are not Christian. You have a lot of people who are making jokes about, paying tithes and Christianity. And I used to work with this one guy. He's passed away now. And he used to say, and I've heard a lot of men say, I'm not giving a grown man money. And I remember saying something about, well, you're not giving a grown man money. You're giving this to the Lord. And what that man does with that money is between him and God. You know, you did your part. So let me read these really quick. And I'm not going to go into like a whole sermon. I'm not a pastor. But Malachi 3, chapter 3, verse 8 through 10. Will a man rob God? Yet he have robbed me. But ye say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offering. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, 6 through 8. But this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly. And he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. Bountiful. That's a tongue twister. Sorry. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9. Honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of thine increase. So you get the gist. We are obligated as Christians to pay our tithes. And, you know, the ministers are supposed to, you know, feed the poor, clothe the poor, paying tithes, to keep the church lights on, and all that goes along with that. But you have a lot of people, which I'm sure this was happening decades ago. It's just that social media is putting a spotlight on a lot of it now. But you have more people now who have found a way to be able to stand in the pulpit and, just so they can collect money. They found a way to put a few Bible verses together. Oh, this sounds good. And, now pass the plate so I can get some money. And so this is why you have to use discernment and be careful about who you are sitting under as far as a pastor. And a lot of these people are going to be held to a higher standard because they decided to get into the pulpit. And a lot of them are purposely, or they might not even be aware that they're leading people astray. So let's keep it to the topic at hand. I feel that he was wrong in his approach because you're supposed to give out of the 10% for sure. And there are other people who can break that down better than me. Pastor Alan Parr, you can find him on YouTube. He's done a whole video on tithing. So I'm not going to be able to go into it and break it down the way that he does. And as I said, I personally pay my tithing, but I'm not going to tell others to do so because, again, I'm not a pastor. I'm just talking surface level. And so this was in the news. I wanted to discuss it. And like I said, Marvin Sapp has since come forward to apologize because, in a sense, he was holding people captive against their will, I'm assuming. And I've been at church where they close the doors and they have the usher standing at the door so you can't walk out during that time. And as I recently read online, and it makes sense, that's to keep people safe. You don't know who might be lurking, around the church doors during tithing. I haven't heard anything, like robberies happening during that time, but it was never a big deal to me, I guess, because I grew up in the church. This was quote unquote normal to collect tithes. Now, obviously, if they're collecting for nefarious reasons, they want to live a lavish lifestyle, and not doing what God has told them to do with that money, then of course there's an issue with that. So with me not knowing his heart, me not knowing, again, not knowing his heart, I've never listened to his sermon. I never got into his music. So maybe something about him just did not jive with me personally. So, but that's my topic today on this particular story. And I will talk to you later. Bye.